Are you ready for the most explosive moment of this entire tale? Picture a quiet desert night suddenly shattered by gunfire and the roar of a massive 18-wheeler barreling straight through an ambush. It's the kind of heart-pounding scene that leaves you breathless, a devoted husband risking everything to save his wife from ruthless captors. That single moment changed the destiny of a fear-stricken town and proved the lengths one person will go for love. If you want to learn every twist, every tense escape, and every showdown that led to this incredible rescue, you've got to hear the whole story from start to finish. So stick with us. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't yet, because we've got many more riveting stories on the way. Trust us, you won't want to miss a single detail of this wild journey. Nora Fletcher had always been happiest when she was on the open road, usually by her husband's side. Wayne Fletcher, a seasoned long-haul trucker, often said there was something about the endless highways that made them feel truly alive and free. They had married young, bonded by a shared longing to see beyond the confines of their small hometown. Over the years, they had been through so many miles and so many adventures that Nora sometimes joked the highway itself was their real home. They had traced countless routes across the country, from lush coastal roads to endless desert stretches, forging a reputation for reliability and grit in the trucking community. If there was a delivery that needed to get through no matter what, Wayne was the man for the job and Nora was his stalwart companion. Together, they believed in standing by each other through anything that life might hurl their way. Yet today, for reasons that felt jarringly out of place, Nora was traveling on her own. It wasn't that the couple wanted to split up. Wayne had picked up an especially demanding kindred in a northern region. He had told Nora it would be brutal, with tight deadlines and uncertain road conditions. Although Nora was used to tough drives, she occasionally liked to handle the logistics, phone calls, and scheduling from a safer location, especially when Wayne had to deal with hazardous mountain roads. This time, she had planned to stay with an old friend in a desert town known for its sun-scorched roads, cheap motel rates, and a certain desolate charm that only true wanderers seem to appreciate. The plan was simple. Wayne would complete his job up north, swing back through the desert, and pick Nora up for their next big haul. They had done this sort of thing a dozen times over the years, but the desert had a way of hiding secrets, and as the sun sank low that evening, the entire world around Nora seemed tinged with an unsettling hush. Nora was headed to the outskirts of La Estrella, a town that was little more than a cluster of old buildings lining the single road that cut through the desert sands. It was a place she knew only vaguely, more from hearsay than memory. Rumors suggested that a local gang had claimed territory there. Some called them a cartel, others just a band of thugs looking to extort travelers passing through. But in Nora's experience, rumors on the road were often exaggerated. The highways were full of spooky stories about bandits and criminals that never really materialized. She was tired after a day of errands and had planned to grab a quick bite before checking into a modest roadside motel. Outside the window, the desert shimmered under the last of the day's heat, the sky awash in a deepening orange. She eased off the gaze, scanning the horizon for the turnoff that would lead her into town. It never crossed her mind that anything truly dangerous could happen in a place this quiet. Sure, she'd heard about petty theft and shady deals, but she wasn't carrying large sums of cash. As the highway stretched on, the emptiness was comforting in a strange way. She fiddled with the radio dial and rolled down her window, breathing in the arid air. If only Wayne could see her now, she thought. He'd be teasing her, telling her she picked the worst possible spot for a pit stop, half joking that desert highways were magnets for trouble in every movie ever made. Nora would roll her eyes. Trouble was always lurking somewhere, that was true, but she had navigated countless tricky situations before. Little did she know she was about to face the kind of danger that would make any rumor pale by comparison. The moment came without warning, a sudden jolt that sent Nora's heart hammering against her ribcage. She felt the steering wheel twist violently under her hands. The car lurched sideways, and the tires squealed in protest against the asphalt. For an instant, she thought it might be a blowout, but then she caught a glimpse in her rearview mirror, a rusted black SUV speeding up behind her. Its front bumper had just clipped the back of her car, forcing her off balance. Before she could react properly, The SUV rammed her again. This time, Nora's car veered onto the sandy shoulder, skidding out of control. Dust enveloped her as the vehicle slid to a halt, nearly rolling before it finally shuddered to a stop. Nora's hands shook. Her mind spun, trying to piece together what had just happened. She barely had time to take a breath when the SUV careened to a stop behind her, headlights casting long beams through the swirling sand. Several men jumped out, their shapes blurred by the settling dust. Nora's instincts, honed by years of traveling with Wayne, kicked in. She snapped open her seatbelt, ready to run, to do anything to avoid being cornered. But the driver's door of the SUV flung open, and out stepped a tall, broad-shouldered figure. He wore a black balaclava that covered most of his face, leaving only his eyes visible, dark eyes that glinted with a menacing calm. She reached for her purse on the passenger seat, desperately hoping to find her cell phone. Before she could even grasp it, her door was yanked open from the outside. Another masked individual sneered down at her, grabbing her arm in a bruising grip. "Get out," he demanded, voice guttural. Nora's pulse thudded in her ears as she resisted the urge to scream. They pulled her forcibly, making her stumble onto the loose sand. She tried to steady herself and maybe break free, but it was impossible. Two more men emerged, all wearing black masks, each armed with a rifle slung across his chest. Their presence radiated a confident menace. This was clearly no random act of road rage. It was an organized ambush. Nora glanced around, hoping against hope for another motorist. The highway was silent, a lonely stretch that seemed miles away from any sign of help. No gas station, no passing car, no place to hide. A wave of cold fear washed through her, but she clung to the idea that Wayne would be looking for her soon, or at least calling to check in. If she could stall, maybe there'd be a chance. But the men gave her no time to think. They shoved her forward, forcing her onto her knees in the sand. The rifles gleamed with lethal promise, ensuring she couldn't act rashly without risking her life. A figure stepped closer, one of the masked men who seemed to be the leader. He walked with a deliberate calm, as though he had all the time in the world. His posture exuded authority, and the other men looked to him for direction. He knelt down, leveling his gaze with Nora's. "Where's your husband?" His voice had a slight accent, smooth yet tinged with cold steel. This was a question, but it felt more like a threat. Nora didn't answer. The question made little sense to her. How did they know Wayne? Why did they care? The man's eyes narrowed as he tilted his head, studying her. "Don't be shy now," he continued, a quiet menace lacing his words. "We have some unfinished business with him." Nora's mind spun. Unfinished business? Wayne's deliveries rarely involved shady dealings. He was a stand-up man, always proud of his spotless reputation. There was no reason criminals would target him, unless it was a simple case of crossing the wrong patch of highway. She had heard stories of gangs that demanded payment or respect from trucks passing through certain routes. But to specifically target Wayne and now to corner his wife, that meant these men were serious, and they believed Wayne had slighted them somehow. Fear threatened to break her composure, but she forced it back. Her gaze darted around, searching for any slim chance of escape. All she saw was the barrel of a gun and the unwavering eyes of masked intruders. The leader, still crouched at her eye level, reached out and roughly lifted Nora's chin so she couldn't look away. In the harsh orange twilight of the desert, she caught a clearer glimpse of the brutality behind his mask. "Answer me," he ordered. Nora clenched her teeth and remained silent. She might have been terrified, but she'd seen enough adversity in her life with Wayne to know that silence sometimes gave you a slight edge. Show no weakness. Give them no information. Annoyed by her defiance, the man stood, then delivered a swift kick of sand toward her face. She flinched and sputtered, gagging on the taste of grit. The others snickered, rifles slung lazily as though they had done this countless times before. These men exuded an air of practiced cruelty. They weren't amateurs looking for a quick robbery. They functioned like a unit. It was clear they had planned every detail of this ambush. The SUV, the balaclavas, the confidence, none of it felt random. And now Nora was forced to wonder, what could Wayne have possibly done to enrage them? One of the men spat on the ground near her feet. "The Fletchers," he said, almost as if the name left a bitter taste in his mouth. The leader nodded, confirming his comrade's words. You people think you run these roads, bringing those big rigs through here, ignoring the tolls we set, thinking you're too tough to pay. He cast a glance at the horizon as though referencing Wayne's route. We told your husband to show some respect last time he drove through. Guess he didn't learn. The words cut into Nora, generating a spark of understanding. Wayne had mentioned a bizarre run-in a few months back, when he hauled freight through a southern desert route. He'd said something about being stopped by men demanding road fees that were clearly not official or legitimate. Wayne had managed to slip past them without paying, outrunning a couple of shady vehicles. He never got a clear look at them or their operation. It was just another close call on the open road. Nora remembered him telling her that if it ever came up again, he'd have no problem standing his ground. They're punks, he'd scoffed. I know how to handle bullies. But apparently these punks had a tighter grip on the region than Wayne had realized, and they hadn't forgotten the humiliation of being outsmarted by a single trucker who refused to be extorted. Now they were taking their revenge by capturing Nora, hoping to draw Wayne out. She tasted fear in her mouth, but she still refused to speak. Giving them any indication of Wayne's plans or whereabouts might endanger him even more. She'd rather they think he was states away, oblivious, than give them a lead. Her silence enraged the leader again. He crossed his arms, signaling to another masked man, a scrawny figure with a glint of viciousness in his eyes. He approached Nora swiftly, grabbed a handful of her hair, and yanked her head back. She stifled a cry of pain. You want to protect him, he hisses. That's sweet, but he's not protecting you now, is he? The man's knife appeared at her throat in a flash. Its edge was cold and sharp, and Nora felt her pulse thunder against its blade. We can find other ways to make you talk, he threatened, pressing the knife just close enough to graze her skin. Nora's heart hammered. She understood that these men might not think twice about hurting her if it served their purpose. But fear and adrenaline sharpened her senses. She tried to focus on her breathing, on the faint sound of the wind skirting across the desert. If Wayne were here, he'd tell her to keep calm, to look for any slip, any small opening that might let her break free. But these men were coiled, poised. They moved with a lethal discipline. No ordinary slip would save her easily. Miles away, Wayne Fletcher was barreling down a different stretch of highway, unaware that his life was about to take a harrowing turn. He was on the final leg of a contract, hauling a load of refrigeration units that needed to be delivered by dawn. Despite the stress of a tight timetable, Wayne took some comfort in knowing he'd be heading straight to pick up Nora after he was done. In truth, he missed her. No matter how many times they took separate jobs, the rig always felt empty without her in the passenger seat. She was his anchor, the only person he trusted to read the road as well as he did. Still, as the tires rumbled on the blacktop, Wayne couldn't shake an odd sense of unease. It was as though a weight pressed on his chest, making every breath feel just a bit too heavy. He chalked it up to exhaustion. He'd been pushing himself hard the past few days. The roads had been narrow and winding, clogged with construction that delayed him more than once. He'd even had to bypass a way station by taking a sketchy detour through old mining territory, which had put him behind schedule. But Wayne Fletcher prided himself on getting the job done, no matter what. In the quiet solitude of his cab, he mentally mapped out how many hours until he'd see Nora, picturing that bright smile that always banished his worries. He flipped on the radio, searching for a local station, hoping for a bit of music or even a news bulletin to keep him company. Static crackled, then a burst of country rock filled the cab. Wayne hummed along, glancing occasionally at his phone to check for service. He planned to call Nora, let her know he was running a bit late, but he noticed he had no signal here in the mountains. Annoyed, he tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. He'd try again once he descended to flatter ground. He had no clue that time was slipping away, and that every minute he was out of contact, Nora was in deeper danger. While Wayne tackled the mountain roads, the men who'd captured Nora were ushering her to a derelict building at the edge of La Estrella, a place that looked like it had once been a general store or small supply depot. The windows were boarded up, the walls cracked. In the fading light, it appeared ghostly, like a set from some forgotten western. The men forced Nora inside, tying her hands behind her back with zip ties and pushing her into a rickety chair in what might have been the store's old stockroom. A single dusty bulb hung overhead, casting flickering shadows against the peeling wallpaper. Reyes, that was the name the others used for the leader, paced in front of her, reviewing messages on his phone. Nora caught glimpses of suspicious texts in another language. It was likely Spanish, though the gloom made it hard to read. She heard the hush of the men's voices as they conferred in corners. They referred to Wayne as the big rig driver or that arrogant trucker, cursing him for slipping past them in the past. At times, their conversation burst with violent threats, fueled by resentment. Nora gleaned enough context to realize that Reyes commanded a ring of extortionists who controlled a key stretch of desert highway. They demanded tribute from truckers. Most paid up quietly, preferring to avoid any trouble. But Wayne unknowingly had humiliated them more than once by refusing to give in or even acknowledging their intimidation. She shuddered to think how much anger they must have harbored, letting it fester until they found an opportunity to corner her alone. Yet amidst her terror, she felt a pang of pride in Wayne. He was never one to bow down to bullies, but this time she worried that pride might cost them more than they could afford. Tied up in that room, Nora fought to keep her mind clear. She thought about Wayne's face, the warmth in his eyes, and silently urged him, wherever he was, to hurry. If anyone could take on these criminals, it was Wayne Fletcher. But he had to realize the danger first. Reyes's phone beeped. He shot a glance at Nora before stepping outside. The scrawny man with the knife, who seemed almost too eager to practice cruelty, stayed behind. He slouched against a wall, idly spinning his blade between his fingers. Every so often he'd look at Nora and smirk, as if sizing up the next gruesome move he might make. Nora refused to drop her gaze, despite the cold sweat collecting at her temples. If he wanted to see fear, she wasn't going to give it to him easily. Time dragged slowly in that desolate room. Every tick of the overhead bulb's faltering hum felt like an eternity. Nora's mind churned through possible scenarios. If she could just get her hands free, maybe she could escape. But even if she slipped past the scrawny man and bolted through the door, she'd still be stuck in the middle of nowhere, with no phone, no allies, and 5 armed criminals on her heels. Hoping a stray Good Samaritan would happen by felt naive. She'd more likely collapse from heat exhaustion or get lost in the pitch-black desert. No, escape had to be timed perfectly, or not at all. Her captor must have sensed her determination, because he kicked off the wall and approached, resting the flat of his blade under her chin. "So, you got a name?" he asked in a mocking tone, as though they were at a bar, exchanging pleasantries. Nora remained silent, steeling herself. He applied gentle pressure with the knife, just enough to make her skin crawl. "Fine, be that way," he said, stepping back with a dismissive shrug. "Doesn't matter. We know you're Mrs. Fletcher. That's enough." Suddenly the door creaked open and Reyes returned, phone in hand, a satisfied grin behind his mask. "We've confirmed that your husband is on his way," he announced to the room, though his eyes pinned Nora. Apparently he finished his run up north and is heading back south. He held up the screen, revealing a photo of Wayne's 18-wheeler. Nora recognized the distinctive turquoise paint job, Wayne's pride and joy. It was parked at some rest area she didn't recognize. She felt a jolt of conflicting emotions. Relief that Wayne was possibly headed her way, terror because these men had obviously tracked him. Reyes approached her with slow, measured steps, as though savoring each moment of her dread. "We'll be nice to him if he cooperates, you know. We'll let you both drive off, but only if he pays what he owes. Nobody crosses our highway without consequences." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But if he tries something stupid, like before," he added, "we'll make sure he regrets it for the rest of his life, however long that might be." Nora clenched her jaw, wishing she could tell Wayne to stay far away, to call the cops or the highway patrol, or the National Guard for that matter. But she knew Wayne. He was protective, stubborn to a fault, and he'd walk straight into hell if it meant saving her. The mere thought gave her a flicker of hope. Wayne wasn't about to let these scum run his life or threaten his wife. She just prayed he'd have the sense to bring backup or somehow outsmart them again. Yet deep down, she understood that once Wayne learned the truth, no power on earth would stop him from driving headlong into the lion's den. And then, all bets would be off. When the desert night fully settled in, the men dragged Nora outside. The moon was a faint sliver, offering barely any light, and a chilling breeze had replaced the scorching heat of the day. Nora's wrists throbbed where the zip ties cut into her skin, and her throat burned from thirst. She wondered how many hours had passed since they first ran her off the road. It felt like an eternity. In her captivity, she caught bits of conversation from the group, gleaning that the town of La Estrella had fallen under their ruthless thumb. They were more than just an extortion gang. They were part of a broader criminal network that exploited vulnerable desert towns, using intimidation and violence to keep the locals compliant. Reyes seemed particularly proud of the control they wielded. He bragged about how the local authorities turned a blind eye, preferring to accept hush money rather than risk an all-out war. People in La Estrella were too frightened to rise up, he claimed. Anyone who tried to resist ended up with a bullet-riddled storefront, or worse. Listening to him gloat, Nora realized that these men relished in power, using fear as their currency. If Wayne stormed in unprepared, it could lead to a bloodbath. Still, fear for Wayne warred with her personal resolve. Nora wasn't one to wilt in the face of bullies. Even as they shoved her back into that run-down building, she inhaled deeply, letting the dryness of the desert air fortify her. She thought about every tough road she and Wayne had ever navigated. Winter blizzards, rock slides, mechanical breakdowns in the middle of nowhere. They had always found a way through. This, she told herself, was no different. She just had to survive long enough for Wayne to do what he did best, beat the odds. In a dark corner of the building, they left her on a creaky wooden chair. A single overhead light flickered, casting an eerie glow on the surrounding debris. Through a cracked doorway, she could see another small room where two of the masked men sat on crates, loading their rifles and talking about the trucker. She pieced together their plan. They wanted Wayne to arrive alone, corner him, and force him to pay an exorbitant tribute. It was basically ransom money, plus interest, plus retribution for the supposed disrespect. If Wayne refused or fought back, they intended to use her as leverage. The men even joked about making a spectacle of it, letting the entire town see how they dealt with outsiders who thought they were invincible. Above all, they seemed to relish the thought of humiliating him. That was the real score to settle. In their eyes, Wayne's previous defiance was a stain on their reputation, a brand of weakness they were desperate to scrub away. Anger simmered in Nora's chest. How dare they reduce her husband, the man she loved, to some trophy in their twisted game? He was a good man, a hard-working trucker who just wanted to make an honest living. These thugs with their masked bravado had no idea what kind of fight they were inviting. She had to admit, though, they had the advantage. Numbers, firepower, a secure location, and the leverage of holding her hostage. Yet Nora couldn't entirely stifle a bitter smile. Reyes and his men knew enough to fear Wayne's skill and resolve. They just didn't grasp the full extent of it. Wayne was resourceful. He could handle more than one might expect from a mere truck driver. They might discover this too late. In another part of the desert, Wayne finally found a patch of road where his cell phone had reception. He slowed the rig along a dusty turnout, yanked the parking brake, and grabbed his phone. Normally, he'd call Nora around this time to check on her. They had an unspoken tradition of sharing updates whenever one of them was on the road and the other was waiting. Wayne dialed her number and waited, tapping his fingers impatiently on the steering wheel. It rang and rang, no answer. He tried again, same result. By the third attempt, a knot of worry tightened in his gut. It was strange. Nora rarely missed his calls. Even if she was busy, she'd pick up or at least send a quick text. Wayne navigated to their favorite messaging app, typed, "Everything okay? Call me ASAP." He hit send and stared at the screen, hoping to see the little indicator that she was typing back. Nothing. He checked the time. Maybe she had gone to bed early, but that idea felt off, especially since she knew he was nearing the end of his route. Concern gnawed at him. He remembered the conversation they had had a few days ago about La Estrella, a place neither of them had ever visited in depth. Nora had said she'd probably scope out a motel or maybe stay with a distant acquaintance. Wayne racked his brain, trying to recall the details. She'd mentioned some guy named Hector, a local friend of her uncle, who supposedly lived a few miles outside of town. If only Wayne had that man's number. He scrolled through his contacts but found nothing. Unsure what else to do, he tried calling Nora once more. Straight to voicemail this time. A trickle of cold sweat ran down his neck. Wayne wasn't a panicky man, but something felt undeniably wrong. He turned the key, starting up the truck's engine again. Without a second thought, he pulled back onto the highway, shifting gears with purpose. His rig thundered forward into the night, the headlights cutting through the darkness in two bright beams. Wayne was a big believer in trusting his instincts. Nora needed him, or at the very least, he needed to confirm she was safe. The best course of action was to head toward La Estrella, the last place he knew she'd planned to be. He didn't have a definitive plan beyond that, but he figured he'd ask around, check motels, maybe speak to local cops if necessary. The nagging sense of dread gnawed at him, urging him to hurry. As the miles ticked by, Wayne's mind flashed back to his earlier encounters on desert roads. He recalled the men who once tried to shake him down for cash, aiming rifles at his windshield. He'd managed to outmaneuver them, leaving them in a cloud of dust, but not before hearing them shout threats. Could these be the same people? He never mentioned the details to Nora, not wanting to worry her. At the time, it felt like a one-off danger. Now, with Nora missing, Wayne felt an icy certainty forming in his gut. It might not be a coincidence. The desert had its bandits, and if they discovered he had a wife traveling nearby, they wouldn't hesitate to exploit that vulnerability. He gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. "Hang on, Nora," he muttered under his breath, the roar of the engine swallowing his words. "I'm coming." Back in the makeshift prison room of the abandoned store, Reyes's men reviewed their plan. One of them, a wiry figure with tattooed forearms, had set up a small lookout at a broken window. He peered out occasionally, scanning the empty road in front of the building. Another man rummaged through a collection of battered crates, presumably checking for any old supplies that might be useful, perhaps rope, spare ammunition, or even leftover food. None of them paid much attention to Nora unless she made a sound, which she tried not to do. It was a strange, tense interlude. Nora's thoughts drifted to Wayne's possible reaction when he found out she was gone. She knew it would be immediate panic followed by fierce determination. He'd risk his own life, no questions asked. A pang of guilt hit her. She didn't want him to walk into a trap. These men were cunning, and they seemed ready to kill without hesitation. If Wayne came unprepared, it would be exactly the kind of scenario they wanted. Her eyes flicked around the room, searching for anything that might help her cut the zip ties. The floor was littered with broken boards and shards of glass. If she could only maneuver herself to a sharp edge, she might saw through the plastic, but the scrawny man with the knife was never too far away, glancing at her like a cat eyeing a cornered mouse. His presence felt like a constant weight pressing on her chest. Still, Nora bided her time, grateful that they hadn't gagged her or sealed her mouth. If an opportunity arose to scream for help, she'd take it, even if the odds were slim. Outside, Reyes paced back and forth, speaking into his phone in tense murmurs. Occasionally, he'd raise his voice, cursing in Spanish about a delayed reinforcement. Nora guessed he wanted more men here, either to intimidate Wayne or to ensure no locals interfered. Meanwhile, the lookout called out, "Nothing yet," every so often, confirming that the road was still empty. Exhaustion pulled at Nora's eyelids, but adrenaline kept her body rigid. She tried to distract herself by recounting her favorite memories with Wayne. The day they bought their first rig, the time they narrowly missed a tornado in the Midwest, the nights they spent sleeping under the stars at truck stops when they were too tired to keep going. Those memories brought a warmth to her chest, a reminder that she had a reason to fight. She thought of how Wayne laughed, that big, hearty sound that shook his shoulders. She pictured the way his rough hands felt when they clasped hers, promising he'd never let her down. If only he'd come bursting through the door, right now. In a moment of sharp realization, Nora understood something crucial. Wayne wouldn't come meandering in through the door like an average person. When he showed up, it would be with the force of a thunderclap, an unstoppable surge of fury in defense of the woman he loved. Wayne might be one man, but these criminals had no idea how much grit and daring he carried in his soul. If they pushed him to the edge, he would do whatever it took, even if it meant outsmarting or overpowering a small army. The only question was, could he do it before Reyes decided her life was forfeit? Eventually, Reyes re-entered the main room, frustration etched into every motion. He signaled for two of his men to follow him outside. Nora heard them talking in hushed tones, though she couldn't catch many details. Something about fixing a perimeter, and ensuring no one sneaks up. They might have been more organized than she initially believed, or maybe Reyes was just paranoid after Wayne's previous escape. Either way, it was clear these men planned to handle the situation methodically. Moments after Reyes and the others left, the scrawny thug ambled closer to Nora, the tip of his blade scraping lightly against the floor. He knelt beside her, his eyes flicking over the zip ties. "You know," he said quietly, "Reyes might go easy on you if your man cooperates, but me?" He let the words hang, giving them an ominous weight. Nora stared straight ahead, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. He leaned in, the smell of sweat and old cigarettes wafting from his clothes. "I like it when people squirm," he added, "so don't give me a reason, hmm?" The venom in his voice made Nora's stomach churn, but she silently reminded herself that fear was the weapon he most wanted to wield. She swallowed the dryness in her throat, refusing to show how terrified she felt. He let out a small chuckle at her silence. Standing up, he sauntered across the room, almost disappointed that she wasn't begging or pleading for mercy. As if to punctuate his threat, a sudden outburst came from outside. One of the lookouts shouted something indecipherable but urgent. The scrawny man spun toward the window, tension snapping through his body. Nora's pulse spiked. Could it be Wayne? She strained against the zip ties, her wrists screaming in protest. She saw the man with the knife rush to join the others, leaving her momentarily unguarded, though still bound. Footsteps pounded outside. Hushed, frantic voices carried on the air. She managed to twist in the chair, craning her neck to glimpse through the broken doorway. Reyes stood in the dim moonlight, checking something on his phone, while a wiry sentinel gestured toward the horizon. Nora couldn't hear their exact words, but their body language suggested something unexpected was headed their way. She silently pleaded, "Please, Wayne, be careful." The men began to mobilize, rifling through the SUV, grabbing more gear, flashlights, extra magazines of ammunition. Despite her precarious situation, a flicker of hope danced in Nora's chest. If it was Wayne, he might be trying to approach stealthily, or maybe he'd discovered a covert way into town. She knew he'd be methodical if he sensed a trap. His entire livelihood depended on reading the road, predicting obstacles, outmaneuvering hazards. This was just a darker, deadlier version of that skill set. But a small part of her worried, what if Reyes had arranged more backup than Wayne expected? A direct assault on armed men could spell disaster, no matter how determined Wayne might be. Through the open door, she could see Reyes stepping away from the group, phone to his ear again, barking orders into it. If reinforcements were indeed on the way, time was not on Wayne's side. Nora looked down at the brittle floorboards, then at the jagged edges of a broken shelf lying nearby. A plan took shape in her mind. If she could scoot the chair closer, she might cut through the zip ties. The scrawny man was nowhere in sight, but others were close. She'd have to be extremely quiet. Mustering her courage, Nora began inching the chair toward the shattered remains of a wooden display. Every shift of her weight produced a grating squeak from the old floor. She paused each time, heart pounding, waiting to see if the men in the adjacent room noticed. Outside, the tension among Reyes and his crew continued to mount. Angry snatches of conversation drifted in. "Better not be a false alarm," and "Aruman, he's too smart to come right down the main road." Clearly, Wayne's cunning had them spooked already. She pressed her advantage, sliding the chair a bit more. Finally, the broken shelf was within reach if she twisted her body just so. She turned her wrists behind her, feeling with her fingertips for a suitable edge. The wood was sharp in places, but not exactly sturdy. With painstaking slowness, she rubbed the zip tie against a jagged corner, back and forth, ignoring the stabs of pain each time the plastic cut into her skin. She had no idea if she had the strength or time to break it, but she refused to stop trying. Each rasp of plastic on wood brought her closer to freedom, or to discovery by one of Reyes's men. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and she clenched her jaw to keep from grimacing. She thought of Wayne, imagining him stealthily approaching the outskirts of La Estrella. He'd be scanning the dusty roads and abandoned buildings, trying to find a clue. He might see her car, battered and off the road. That would confirm his worst fears, and he'd come for her in a heartbeat. But how would he stand against 5 armed criminals alone? He might have a shotgun in the rig, maybe a sidearm he occasionally kept hidden for emergencies. Was that enough? A faint snap jolted her back to the present. The zip tie had weakened, fraying slightly. She felt an electric rush of hope. She'd have to push harder. Gritting her teeth, she sawed faster, each movement of her wrists a painful burn. She paused only when she heard Reyes's voice. Closer now. He was telling someone to check the perimeter again. Footsteps echoed near the doorway. Nora froze, breath caught in her throat. The tie was partly severed, but not completely. If they came in now, it would be obvious she was attempting to escape. Seconds ticked by. Finally, the footsteps receded. Taking a silent breath, Nora resumed the frantic rubbing. Her wrists throbbed, her fingers stung, but she pressed on. Come on, she urged silently, focusing all her will on that thin strip of plastic. Another snap, this time louder. She felt the zip tie loosen. Before she could fully free her hands, a sharp voice cut through the building. "We see headlights." Nora's heart soared and sank in the same instant. Headlights likely meant Wayne, but it also meant danger. The men scrambled, voices overlapping. "Get into position. Don't shoot unless I give the signal. He might not be alone." She realized that whether Wayne had come prepared or not, he was outnumbered. She twisted her wrists once more, ignoring the pain. The tie snapped free. Finally, she stifled a groan of relief, carefully allowing her hands to fall to her sides, as if still bound, just in case anyone looked in. Nora's newfound freedom buzzed through her veins. Yet she knew she had to be smart. Charging out of the building now could get her shot in the crossfire. In the dim flicker of the overhead bulb, she risked a glance at the door, wishing she could see Wayne. No doubt he was just outside, and from the sounds of it, the men were converging on whichever road he was taking. She heard the metallic click of rifles being readied. Her heart pounded so hard it almost hurt. But an odd calm also settled over her. If Wayne was here, then she was not alone in this desert hell anymore. Reyes's barked orders carried inside. "Hold your fire until I say. Let him get close. We'll box him in." She guessed they wanted Wayne in a kill box, a trap from which he couldn't escape or fight back effectively. They probably aimed to blow out his tires or pin him under threat of bullet fire. Another voice warned, "He's moving fast. That's not a cautious approach." A note of worry. What if he doesn't stop? Nora felt a fierce surge of pride. That's my Wayne, she thought. Charging headlong, trusting his instincts, unstoppable once he decided to protect what mattered. The only question was whether that boldness would save him or destroy him. She couldn't just sit there, a silent witness to whatever might unfold. Spurred by desperation, she quietly moved her arms in front of her, ignoring the sting from her raw wrists. If she could find a weapon, maybe the scrawny man's knife or a piece of shattered glass big enough to wield, she might tip the scales. She scanned the room. Nothing but scattered debris and rotted wooden planks. Just outside the door, she knew the men had rifles. She also recalled the scrawny man who seemed to enjoy torment. He might be patrolling somewhere close. Perhaps if she caught him by surprise, she could grab his knife. But the risk was enormous. One wrong move, and she'd be overpowered again. Or killed. Still, her life was already on the line. Doing nothing meant leaving Wayne to face them alone. An explosion of noise tore through the night, making her jump. It sounded like metal colliding with metal at high speed, followed by a crunching impact. Nora's blood went cold. She heard shouting, frantic and disbelieving. "He rammed straight into us!" Another voice. "The crazy bastard just took out Armando!" The chaos was deafening. Engines roared, tires screeched, bullets rattled off metal. It sounded like the gates of hell had opened right outside the abandoned store. Nora seized the moment. With careful, urgent steps, she slipped from the chair and edged toward the doorway. The corridor beyond was mostly dark. She saw a figure running past, a rifle in hand. He seemed to be heading for the front entrance. Shouts overlapped. "Block him! He's going around!" A terrifying wave of gunfire rattled the walls, and dust rained from the ceiling. Nora's heart hammered. This was it, the confrontation she had feared. She had to act or risk losing everything. Nora's first instinct was to flee out the back, if there was one. Cautiously, she made her way down the dim corridor, one hand trailing along the cracked walls to maintain balance in the gloom. She spotted a heavy wooden door at the end, seemingly an old stockroom exit. She prayed it wasn't locked. Behind her, the commotion intensified. She heard a booming engine, possibly Wayne's truck, and the desperate crack of rifles returning fire. Every muscle in her body trembled with adrenaline, but she forced herself to move quietly, methodically. When she reached the door, she braced her shoulder against it and pushed. It gave a fraction of an inch, but jammed. She tried again, still locked or barricaded. She bit her lip. Time was running out. She could almost hear Wayne's voice telling her to never give up. Taking a breath, she jammed her shoulder harder, ignoring the pain that shot down her arm. The door creaked ominously, but refused to open. She nearly cried out in frustration. A burst of light drew her attention back to the main area. Flames flickered through a shattered window, illuminating swirling dust outside. She realized something had caught fire, maybe a car engine. Through the haze, she thought she saw the gleam of Wayne's turquoise rig, partially hidden by the crumpled remains of the black SUV that had forced her off the road earlier. Her heart clenched. If Wayne had used his truck as a battering ram, he was either unbelievably brave or unbelievably desperate. The swirl of dust made it impossible to see if he was hurt, and the muzzle flashes from guns lit the night like sporadic fireworks. A figure stumbled into the corridor. Nora shrank back into the shadows, barely daring to breathe. It was one of the masked men. She could tell by his silhouette. He was limping, clutching his arm. As he leaned against the wall for support, she noticed the rifle dangling uselessly from his other hand. This might be her chance to get armed. Her mind raced. If he was injured, he might not be able to fight back effectively. She could possibly ambush him, but she had to do it swiftly and with total surprise. Summoning every ounce of courage, Nora moved. She lunged from the shadows, gripping the barrel of his rifle. He let out a startled yelp, struggling to raise the weapon. Her momentum carried her forward, and she slammed her shoulder into him, toppling him to the floor. Pain shot through her battered wrists, but adrenaline carried her past it. The man cursed, lashing out with a wild swing. Nora ducked, using the butt of the rifle to knock his balaclava askew. His eyes widened in shock as she wrenched the weapon from his grip. For a moment, the two locked gazes. She could feel his fury and pain, see the disbelief that she of all people was fighting back. Summoning a final burst of strength, Nora swung the rifle's butt into his temple. He collapsed onto the floor in a heap, unconscious or barely conscious. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she stood over him, rifle in hand, shock flooding her. She'd never attacked anyone so violently in her life. But out here in this lawless desert, she had no choice. She had to survive and save Wayne from this ambush. Outside the battered storehouse, the desert night had erupted into a storm of chaos. Wayne Fletcher had indeed arrived, and he hadn't come quietly. Roaring through the darkness, his turquoise 18-wheeler had plowed straight into the cartel's black SUV, the same one that had run Nora off the road hours earlier. Metal crunched and glass shattered with an ear-splitting clamor. Flames licked at twisted debris, casting a lurid, dancing glow across the abandoned storefronts of La Estrella. Wayne's heart hammered in his chest. He barely remembered shifting gears or accelerating into that reckless ramming maneuver. He only knew that these men had taken his wife. Fear mixed with fury drove him forward, a potent cocktail that overshadowed any thought of personal safety. After smashing into the SUV, he leapt from the truck's cab, shotgun clenched in both hands. One of the masked men fired at him wildly, bullets whizzing past Wayne's shoulder. He hit the ground rolling, his boots raising clouds of gritty dust as he came up on one knee, returning fire. Two of the thugs dove for cover behind a pile of rotting crates. Wayne's blast shredded wood and sent splinters flying. Amid the swirling haze of dust, he glimpsed the storehouse door, the very building where, if his hunch was right, Nora was being held. "Hold on, Nora," he breathed, wiping sweat from his brow. "I'm not leaving without you." He pressed his back against the wreck of his rig, grateful it provided a moment's shelter. Adrenaline buzzed in his veins. He'd been in rough spots before. He'd had guns pointed at him, faced off against roadside bandits, but never with Nora's life hanging in the balance. Everything felt sharper, more dangerous, more desperate. Bullets pinged off the metal side of the truck. Wayne winced, heat searing his lungs with every breath. He needed to end this quickly. If these thugs cornered him or cut him off from the building, Nora might be at the mercy of the worst among them. A glimpse of movement caught his eye. One of the masked men was slinking around the far side, possibly trying to flank him. Wayne pumped the shotgun once, rose to a half-crouch, and let loose a measured shot. The muzzle flash lit the night like a strobe, and the masked figure dropped with a ragged scream. There was no time to reflect. Wayne lunged for a battered side entrance, keeping his head low. Somewhere in the distance, he heard Reyes barking orders in Spanish, furious at the unexpected turn. The leader's voice rang out, "Box him in! Don't let him near the girl!" Wayne clenched his jaw. They're talking about Nora. That single fact galvanized him. He had to get inside, had to find her, free her, and get the two of them out of this desert town that reeked of oppression and fear. One more shot rang out, and Wayne felt a bullet zing past, close enough to stir the dust at his ankles. Breathing hard, he willed his heart to steady. This was no ordinary fight. This was life or death, and Wayne planned to come out on top. Inside the dim corridor, Nora clutched the rifle she'd wrested from the injured thug. Her wrists burned from the raw scrapes where the zip ties had bit into her skin. Every muscle tensed as bursts of gunfire rattled the walls. If she'd had any doubt that Wayne was here, it vanished the moment she heard that unmistakable roar of an 18-wheeler plowing into something at full speed. Only her husband would do something so brazen, so downright terrifying, and so heroic all at once. She pressed herself against the corridor's crumbling plaster, ears tuned for any sign that someone was about to rush in. A few minutes earlier, she had knocked out one of Reyes's men, claiming his rifle. Yet she didn't quite know how to use it well. She'd shot firearms before, but nothing this heavy or automatic. Her hands shook, adrenaline surging, but she refused to let fear paralyze her. She owed Wayne every ounce of courage she could summon. Gunshots echoed through the shattered windows. Her mind whirred. Okay, Wayne's outside, exchanging fire. There are at least 4 or 5 of these men still standing. Maybe more if reinforcements arrived. The scale of the danger hit her full force, but so did her resolve. She thought back to all the years on the road, the way Wayne protected her, and she protected him. They were partners, equals, and in this brutal moment, she had to hold her own. Creeping along the corridor, she spotted that scrawny thug who'd tormented her earlier, lying sprawled near an open doorway. He wasn't moving. She swallowed hard. Did Wayne shoot him, or was he hit by friendly fire? She didn't know, and a pang of revulsion twisted her stomach at the thought of death so close. Yet these men had kidnapped her, threatened her life. This was war, plain and simple. A sudden scraping sound jolted her attention to the corridor's far end. One of Rhea's men, a tall figure with a tattoo along his neck, stumbled in, half covered in dust and sweat. He spotted Nora and froze. For a fraction of a second, both of them registered the impossibility of what they were seeing. The captive, free and armed. The captor, wounded and disoriented. He raised his rifle first. Nora's pulse slammed in her ears as she squeezed the trigger of her own weapon. A thunderous retort filled the corridor, and the recoil slammed against her shoulder. She fell back a step, barely maintaining her grip. The tall thug staggered, struck in the arm. He let out a guttural howl, fumbling to bring his weapon back up. The corridor was too narrow for both to maneuver easily. Panicking, Nora tried to steady her aim again. Before he could fire, a bullet tore through the flimsy wall at an angle, hitting the thug square in the chest. He collapsed with a strangled gasp. Nora blinked, realizing someone else had fired that shot from outside. Whether it was Wayne or another stray bullet, she couldn't be sure. But the outcome was the same. She was still alive, and one more captor was down. Nora's hands trembled around the rifle's stock, her breath coming in ragged spurts. She risked a quick glance through the bullet-pocked opening in the wall. Flickers of light from the burning SUV illuminated the dusty street. Amid swirling smoke, she could just make out the silhouette of Wayne's truck, and Wayne himself crouched near its passenger side, shotgun at the ready. Seeing him safe lit a spark of renewed courage in her chest. "Wayne!" she shouted, though she wasn't sure if her voice could carry over the chaos. She heard men yelling, Spanish curses mixing with the crack of gunshots. One voice, pitched in desperation, hollered, "He's by the truck! Flank him!" Fear spiked in Nora's stomach. They're trying to outmaneuver him. She cast a glance at the boarded wooden door at the end of the corridor. It had refused to budge before. Now, with her nerves lit up by adrenaline, maybe she could force it open from the inside, or even find a small window leading out. If she could slip outside and circle around, she might help Wayne by drawing some of the gunman's fire away from him. But that was if she didn't get herself shot first. Steeling her resolve, she tiptoed forward, staying low. The hallway seemed interminably long, every footstep echoing unnaturally loud in her ears. She passed by broken shelves, stray boxes, and puddles of dust-laden water from a long-defunct pipe. A scorpion skittered across her path, illuminated momentarily by flickering light from outside. Focus, she told herself. Don't get distracted. At last, Nora reached the end. The same exit door that had thwarted her earlier now loomed like a final barrier to salvation. She tested the handle, still locked. She braced her boot against the base and used all her strength to shove. The door budged, hinges squealing, but something, maybe a heavy bar or padlock, kept it from opening fully. She wondered if there was enough space to slip through if she pushed it open just a crack. Leveraging her body weight, she shoved again. The door inched open, revealing a sliver of the outside world, a dark alleyway strewn with broken pallets. Cool desert air hit her face. She inhaled, relief mingling with the urgency. It wasn't wide enough for a clean escape, but maybe she could wedge herself through. Gripping the rifle awkwardly with one hand, she sucked in her abdomen and tried to slide out sideways. A distant shout made her freeze. "Hey, she's back there!" The voice came from inside the building, from one of the side rooms. "They've realized I'm missing." Panic pulsed through her. If she didn't get out now, they'd corner her here. Summoning every ounce of strength, Nora shoved her shoulder against the door a final time. It groaned in protest, the wood splitting near the hinges. She squeezed through, heart pounding, and stumbled into the alleyway beyond. Once outside, Nora found herself behind the dilapidated storehouse, where the moonlight revealed piles of debris and corrugated metal sheets leaning precariously against the walls. The pungent odor of burnt rubber drifted over from the crash site. She bent over, trying to steady her breathing. Her wrists screamed in pain from the pressure of contorting herself through the narrow gap, but she refused to let that slow her. Her mind raced. Which way to go? She could hear the sporadic burst of gunfire from the front of the building, so Wayne was still locked in a fight out there. Another volley of shots rang out, accompanied by shouts of anger. The sound of glass shattering told her someone was probably trying to break windows or shoot through them for a better vantage point. Nora's priority was to find an angle that could help Wayne. If she could distract even one or two of the remaining gunmen, Wayne might have a clearer shot or a safer path to the storehouse. Clutching the rifle, she moved along the back wall, her footsteps light. Every shadow felt menacing in the moonlit gloom, every shape a potential threat. She spotted a corner of the building up ahead, giving her a partial view of the street in front. Carefully, she crouched and peered around it. The scene was both horrifying and strangely surreal under the flicker of the SUV's flames. Wayne's turquoise rig was partially jackknifed, the front bumper crumpled and blackened by smoke. Another smaller car, possibly belonging to Reyes's crew, had slammed into a lamppost, its hood spewing steam. Near that wreck, Nora counted at least 3 men in dark clothing, rifles at the ready, scanning for Wayne's position. Further to the left, closer to the smashed SUV, Wayne was hunched behind an old rusted water trough, taking cover. From where Nora crouched, she saw that the ground around him was peppered with bullet impacts. Her heart clenched. He's pinned down. Even if Wayne tried to move, those 3 armed men had him in their sights. Nora swallowed hard. What could she do? She was no sniper. Firing a rifle from this distance, especially in the dark, felt like a gamble. Yet if she did nothing, Wayne risked getting flanked or shot the moment he attempted to shift position. She closed her eyes briefly, inhaling the acrid air. Come on, Nora. Remember everything Wayne taught you about composure. She steadied the rifle against a piece of broken concrete for support. Her eyes flicked over the men's positions, trying to pick which one was the biggest threat. One of them, a stocky figure with a large automatic rifle, seemed to be calling the shots. He'd gesture for the others to advance in short bursts, trying to close in on Wayne from multiple angles. Nora pressed her cheek against the rifle's stock, aligning the sights as best she could. The man's silhouette was faint in the smoky gloom, but she had a clear enough outline to aim at his torso. Her heart pounded so hard she worried it might throw off her aim. Gritting her teeth, she exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The muzzle flash blinded her for an instant. The recoil hammered her shoulder again. Did she hit him? She couldn't tell immediately, but the stocky man jerked sideways, stumbling into the dirt with a pained roar. His companions yelled in alarm, whirling around in confusion. Nora quickly ducked back behind cover, not wanting to present an easy target. Her chest flooded with both relief and dread. She'd successfully hit one of them, possibly preventing Wayne from being overrun. But now they knew someone else was shooting at them from behind the building. Sure enough, retorts of gunfire spat in her direction, the bullets chipping at the concrete corner she used as shelter. She pressed her body flat against the wall, breath ragged, beads of sweat tracing her temples. A torrent of thoughts cascaded through her mind. I've never shot a person before. She'd always believed in self-defense, sure, but pulling the trigger on another human being felt like crossing an irrevocable line. Yet these men had forced her hand. She tried to swallow the roiling guilt and fear, focusing instead on Wayne. One life she absolutely refused to lose was his. In the lull between bursts of gunfire, she risked a glance around the corner again. The two remaining men near the broken car had scattered. One ducked behind the passenger door of the wreckage, while the other sprinted for better cover near a half-collapsed porch. Meanwhile, Wayne took advantage of their distraction. She glimpsed him darting from the water trough to a wooden barrel that offered slightly closer cover. Every movement was a gamble in this dusty battlefield. Suddenly, the sharp command of Reyes's voice sliced through the clamor. "Stop firing! Bring me the trucker alive!" Nora couldn't see him, but his voice boomed from somewhere near the storehouse facade. The firing slowed, though sporadic shots still rang out like defiant punctuation marks. From the corner of her vantage point, Nora saw the muzzle of a rifle appear, aiming toward her husband's position. "No, you don't," she thought grimly. She raised her own rifle again, aiming carefully. Her hands shook, but she forced them steady. She fired a quick shot, forcing the hidden gunman to duck down. The bullet clanged against metal, harmless. Still, it kept him pinned for a moment, buying Wayne precious seconds to move. Wayne seized the chance, dashing across open ground to the relative safety of an overturned cart. Nora's pulse soared, praying that one of the lurking shooters wouldn't pop out and gun him down mid-sprint. But Wayne made it. She exhaled in relief. Then, with a whoosh of wind and a roar of engines, two more vehicles tore onto the scene from the edge of town. Headlights blazed, illuminating the dusty air in a harsh white beam. Nora's throat went dry. More of Reyes' men, or... Her mind reeled. It could be police, but from the style of the trucks, both old, battered pickups with dark-tinted windows, she guessed it was the Cartel's reinforcements Reyes had been calling for. The trucks skidded to a halt, and armed men spilled out. Nora counted at least 4 new arrivals, each brandishing an assault rifle. Wayne, huddled behind that cart, was suddenly outnumbered by nearly double. What do we do now, Nora wondered, fear gnawing at her resolve. The flicker of earlier triumph evaporated as the dire reality set in. They were in an all-out war zone, the two of them against a growing army. Wayne felt a cold dread settle in his stomach as he watched more of Rhea's men arrive. Standing behind the shattered remnants of a wooden cart, he peered through a bullet hole in one of the planks. The new arrivals fanned out quickly, each taking cover behind crates, cars, or any structure they could find. An uneasy lull fell over the street, everyone repositioning, anticipating the next exchange of fire. Despite the suffocating tension, a flicker of hope warmed Wayne's chest when he spotted a muzzle flash from the building's backside, aimed at the cartel thugs who had him pinned. Nora. She was free, she was armed, and she was fighting. Pride and worry mingled in his heart. His wife was safe enough to shoot, but every shot drew attention to her location. He feared the reprisal might come swift and lethal. He glanced at his shotgun. He'd already used most of his shells. A half-loaded revolver was tucked in his waistband, his last resort. Between the scuffed rig and the truck's interior, he had a small stash of ammo, but retrieving it now would involve darting across a wide swath of open ground. With these new arrivals scanning the street, that felt like a suicide run. I've got to figure something else out. The flickers of flame from the wrecked SUV provided intermittent lighting, creating long, dancing shadows. Wayne detected movement from his left, a silhouette creeping along the side of a low building. It might be one of Reyes's men, attempting to flank him. He pressed himself lower, inching around the corner of the cart. On another night under different circumstances, he'd rely on stealth and cunning, maybe wait them out until they made a mistake. But Nora was out here too, and every second they lingered in this firefight meant another second she was at risk. He sucked in a breath, steeled his nerves. Time to even the odds. Focusing on the swirling dust and flaring shadows, he saw a shape behind an old oil drum. One of the newly arrived thugs seemed preoccupied, scanning the wrong direction. Wayne aimed carefully, then fired his shotgun. The street echoed with the blast. The thug cried out, collapsing behind the drum. At once, gunfire erupted again from multiple directions. Bullets whipped past Wayne's cover, ricocheting off the cart. Chest tight with urgency, Wayne scrambled to the cart's other side. More shots pelted the ground, raising plumes of dust. He could hear them shouting in Spanish, cursing him. A barked command demanded they close in and finish him off. Crouched low, Wayne spotted the body of a masked man he'd shot earlier. The man's assault rifle lay a few feet away in the street. If Wayne could grab it, he might stand a better chance against the reinforcements. But those few feet looked like an ocean of danger with all those rifles pointed his way. I need a distraction. In that moment, as if reading Wayne's thoughts, Nora provided exactly the distraction he needed. From her vantage point behind the storehouse, she unleashed another volley of rifle fire. Careful, measured shots that forced two of the masked men near the overturned car to duck for cover. A burst of Spanish expletives followed, and Wayne saw an opening. He launched himself forward, sliding across the gritty street toward the fallen man's assault rifle. His torso scraped against rocks and broken glass, but he ignored the pain. Grabbing the rifle by its strap, he rolled behind a stack of wood pallets just as more bullets pelted the ground where he'd been. The shift to a heavier weapon in his hands felt like a surge of possibility. Better range, more ammunition, he thought, swallowing a tense breath. Bracing the rifle, Wayne popped up above the pallets and fired a short burst at the men huddled near the burning SUV. It wasn't exactly pinpoint accuracy, but it was enough to scatter them. He saw one man flail backward, clutching his leg. The others cursed, diving behind the vehicle's frame. Flames from the wreck spouted sparks, painting the night in a nightmarish orange glow. Reyes's voice boomed through the din, laced with frustration and fury. "Find the woman! She's behind the building somewhere!" Wayne's stomach lurched. He aimed another burst, forcing the shooters near the storehouse to keep their heads down. If Reyes turned his men's attention solely on Nora, she'd be overwhelmed. Wayne had to prevent that. At the same time, he couldn't leave her pinned. The thought of Nora fighting for her life, alone in that alley, spurred him to move. He reloaded the rifle with trembling hands, pushing aside the swirl of dust and adrenaline. Without warning, a volley of shots hammered the pallets in front of him, splintering wood in a deadly barrage. He dropped flat, pressing his cheek against the dirt. A bullet tore through the side of a crate inches from his head. Can't stay here, he realized, chest heaving. He risked a quick look over his shoulder, trying to locate a safer approach to the storehouse. The nearest cover was an old pickup with two flat tires, maybe 10 yards away. Beyond that was an alley entrance that led behind the building. If he could make it there, he might circle around and reach Nora, or at least link up with her. But covering that distance under fire was another matter entirely. The men entrenched on the street had eyes everywhere, and Reyes's reinforcements made it a deadly gauntlet. Don't overthink. Just do it, Wayne told himself, bracing for a desperate dash. Drawing in a breath, Wayne pressed his back against the pallets and counted to 3. On the third count, he pivoted and sprinted. Gunfire erupted almost instantly, bullets peppering the ground around him. Each step felt like an eternity. He dove behind the battered pickup, rolling to a halt. Pain shot through his shoulder as he collided with the rusted door, but he was alive and out of the direct line of fire, for the moment. Breathing raggedly, Wayne glanced around, searching for the next piece of cover. The alley was just ahead, a dark gap between two decrepit buildings. If he could slip through, maybe he could regroup with Nora. He swallowed hard, adrenaline roaring in his veins, and prepared to move again. On the opposite side of the storehouse, Nora knew she had drawn too much attention. The men near the front were shouting directions about flanking her. She pressed her back against the wall and tried to calm her hammering heartbeat. Where is Wayne now, she wondered, half tempted to poke her head out and look. But the barrage of bullets told her the enemy was closing in. A sharp whistle cut through the night, followed by a man's barking order in Spanish. You, go around, cut her off. She heard rapid footsteps scraping against gravel, then silence. Dread squeezed her chest. They were trying to surround her. If she waited here, she'd be trapped between multiple gunmen. That left one option: move. Crouching low, she darted along the storehouse's rear wall, heading for a narrow gap between it and the adjacent building. A swirl of dust tore at her eyes, and the acrid stench of burning rubber clung to her nostrils. Every few steps, she paused, listening for footsteps or whispers. Her senses felt dialed to 11, each nerve vibrating with tension. Soon she reached a small side alley, littered with debris and shattered bottles. The moonlight barely reached this claustrophobic passage. The only illumination came in fitful bursts from the ongoing chaos out front. Flashes of gunfire, flickers of flame. Nora thought she heard Wayne's voice once, shouting an indistinct curse. But it was drowned out by the roar of an engine and the rattle of automatic rifles. She gripped her own rifle tighter. Her left arm trembled, either from the recoil earlier or sheer exhaustion. Stepping as silently as possible, she followed the narrow path that seemed to lead around to the street. If I can get back to Wayne. But she knew it was a coin toss. The men might be converging on the same route. Her breath caught when she heard scraping footsteps echoing around the corner. She jerked back into a shallow recess in the wall, heart pounding so loud she feared it might give her away. A figure emerged, a masked man with a rifle, breathing heavily, presumably searching for her. He inched forward, scanning every shadow, the barrel of his weapon swinging left and right. Nora's throat felt tight. She could try to ambush him, as she had before, but the corridor was too narrow for a quick retreat if she failed. She glanced at a chunk of broken brick near her foot. Maybe if she threw it in the opposite direction, the sound would distract him, drawing his attention away. It was a risk, but waiting passively felt worse. Taking a careful breath, she bent down, scooped the fragment of brick, and tossed it toward the end of the alley. The clatter echoed sharply. The masked man spun toward the noise, rifle raised, tension thrumming in every movement. Now, Nora lunged from her hiding spot, rifle up, finger on the trigger. She squeezed off 2 shots. One tore into the man's torso at an angle. The other pinged off the wall. He collapsed, rifle skidding across the alley floor, a strangled groan escaping his throat. Nora stood there trembling, uncertain if he was alive or dead. She couldn't linger to check. With her heart threatening to burst from her chest, Nora sprinted past the fallen man, deeper into the alley. She had no time to ponder the moral weight of her actions. Survival was everything, and each moment exposed her to more of Rhea's crew. She skidded around a corner, stumbling on loose gravel, then caught herself against a corrugated metal fence. Behind her, the night still crackled with gunfire. She prayed Wayne was managing to hold his own. If he was making a push toward the storehouse, maybe they'd intersect somewhere in these alleys. But she also realized that with each shot she fired, she announced her location. By now, Reyes had to know she'd escaped her bindings and was fighting back. Nora pressed on. The alley opened up into a slightly wider space. A few rusted dumpsters lined the back entrances of abandoned shops. She recognized a faint sign overhead, an old bar that must have shuttered decades ago. The door near the dumpster was ajar, barely clinging to its hinges. Could I hide in there, she wondered. Then again, cowering in a dark building could be a death sentence if the cartel checked inside with flashlights and guns. She took a hesitant step toward the open door, then froze. Across the open space, partially hidden by shadows, a figure in dark clothing stepped into view. His mask was off, revealing a sweaty face contorted in rage. Reyes himself. He spotted Nora almost instantly. She caught the glint of a pistol in his hand, aimed directly at her. Adrenaline spiked in her veins. Before she could react, Reyes snarled, "Drop it!" Nora had her rifle in a defensive grip, but he was a fraction quicker on the draw. She realized she was in the open with no immediate cover. If she refused, he'd shoot. If she dropped the rifle, she'd be helpless. For a heartbeat, the entire world seemed to narrow to the circle of that gun's muzzle pointed at her chest. Her mouth went dry. Reyes took a step closer, eyes brimming with lethal intent. "You think you can fight us all, trucker's wife?" he taunted, voice hoarse. "You've caused enough trouble, and your man won't save you." Nora's mind raced. Should she attempt a desperate shot? He already had her lined up. One wrong move and he'll pull that trigger. Time seemed to slow. She became acutely aware of every detail. The ragged rise and fall of his chest, the faint tremor in her exhausted arms, the scuff of her boots in the gravel. Just as her grip slackened on the rifle, her survival instinct screaming to comply, a furious roar tore through the alley. Wayne burst around the corner, assault rifle blazing. The staccato thunder reverberated off the alley walls. Reyes spun, trying to return fire, but Wayne's shots pinned him down. Nora wasted no time. She dove behind the dumpster, her body slamming into dented metal. Bullets ricocheted off the ground, sparks flying. Reyes hissed in pain or anger. Nora couldn't tell which, and scrambled for cover behind a thick concrete pillar near the bar's old foundation. Nora's ears rang from the gunfire echoing in the narrow space. Heart pounding, she clutched the rifle, checking quickly if any rounds remained. She had maybe a handful left in the magazine, if that. Close by, Wayne's crouched figure was partially visible behind a cluster of broken pallets. Seeing him alive, panting, sweat trickling down his grimy face made her want to weep with relief. But the moment was too perilous for any reunion. Reyes, cornered but still dangerously armed, shouted a curse in Spanish. He fired a wild shot that clipped the edge of the dumpster, shrieking off metal. Nora and Wayne ducked in unison. She locked eyes with her husband for an instant. Those eyes, full of desperate determination, conveyed more than any words. "We're still here. We fight together." Nora realized they had the advantage of numbers, 2 against 1, if no other cartel members reached this alley. But Reyes was cunning. She recalled how swiftly he'd orchestrated her kidnapping and kept the town under his thumb. He'd be no easy foe, even cornered. Shooting a glance behind her, Nora verified that no other gunmen approached from the direction she'd come. It seemed the bulk of Reyes's men were pinned down or possibly retreating after heavy losses. Maybe the case of the fight out front had scattered them. If so, Reyes was truly alone here, a lion backed into a corner. Wayne gestured to Nora, pointing 2 fingers at his eyes, then in Reyes's direction, a silent signal for them to coordinate. She nodded, shifting her stance to aim. They needed to flush Reyes into the open, or at least keep him pinned until they could disarm him. Wayne fired a short burst. The muzzle flash lit his face in stark relief, revealing the tension etched in every line. Bullets sparked off the concrete pillar, forcing Reyes to hunker down. In response, he blindly returned fire, a bullet striking the brick wall behind Wayne with a furious crack. Wayne ducked, wincing as small shards of brick flew. Nora inhaled, bracing her rifle against the dumpster's corner. If she could line up a shot, an unexpected roar interrupted her. Reyes, perhaps realizing he was about to be overrun, sprang out from behind the pillar, gun blazing. His shots hammered the dumpster, driving Nora to flatten herself on the ground. Wayne shouted, "Get down!" as he unleashed another volley. Reyes jerked mid-stride, one arm flailing as Wayne's bullets found their mark. Yet the cartel leader refused to go down easily. Staggering, he raised his pistol at Wayne. Nora screamed a warning, launching herself upright and firing at Reyes in the same heartbeat. Her shot punched into his side. Reyes let out a choked gasp, stumbling forward, his gun clattering on the gravel. Momentum carried him 2 more steps before he collapsed onto his knees, struggling to breathe. Wayne kept his rifle trained, uncertain if Reyes might draw another weapon. The man glared at them both with a mix of fury and disbelief. Blood seeped through his dark clothing, glistening in the alley's pale light. A tense hush settled. Nora's pulse pounded in her ears. She and Wayne locked eyes again. They were both alive, miraculously, but they had to be sure the threat was truly over. Cautiously, Wayne approached Reyes, rifle still aimed. He kicked the man's pistol away, sending it skidding across the gravel. Reyes knelt there, breathing in ragged, shallow gasps. The defiance in his eyes burned hot, though he seemed too weak to do more than glare. "I warned you," Wayne said, voice taut with pent-up anger. You touch my wife, you pay. Reyes coughed, spitting blood. For a moment, he looked like he might try to speak. A sneer tugged at his lips, as if he wanted to hurl one last insult. But all that came out was a rasp, pained and incoherent. Finally, he slumped sideways, unconscious, or too far gone to sustain that hatred any longer. Nora emerged from behind the dumpster, shoulders trembling. She kept her rifle pointed, but lowered it slightly once she saw Reyes wasn't moving. Her eyes flicked around the alley, half expecting more gunmen to materialize. None came. Only the distant pops of sporadic gunfire indicated that some fight still raged on the main street. Wayne exhaled sharply. Nora. He rushed toward her, arms open. She dropped her rifle at last, letting out a raw sob of relief as they collided in an embrace. Dust, sweat, and fear clung to them both, yet the sensation of being together overshadowed any discomfort. Nora buried her face against Wayne's shoulder, gripping him as if she feared he'd disappear if she loosened her hold. For a long moment, they stayed that way, two exhausted souls in a battered alley, hearts hammering in unison. When they finally broke apart, Wayne cupped her face in his hand. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice wavering with concern. She shook her head, though tears stung her eyes. "Just shaken," she whispered. "You?" "Nothing major," he said, though his arm was flecked with blood. Whether his own or from someone else, he hadn't quite registered. Adrenaline still coursed through him, numbing any minor injuries. "We need to get out of here. They might have more men." Nora nodded, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "The rest of them are still out front, or scattered. I don't know how many are left." She glanced at Reyes's slumped form, an uneasy sense of finality filling the air. The man who orchestrated her kidnapping lay beaten at their feet, undone by the very trucker he'd underestimated. Wayne tossed the assault rifle strap over his shoulder, then took Nora's hand. "Come on, we'll circle back, see if your car can still move. If it can't, we'll take one of theirs. We have to get you medical attention. Let the authorities know." He trailed off, realizing how ironic it was to think about local law enforcement in a place practically ruled by this cartel. The mention of authorities hung in the air like a tentative hope. What if the entire town is too afraid to cooperate? Nora wondered. But even if they had to drive to the next county, they'd do it. They emerged from the alley into the wider street, rifles at the ready. Fires still smoldered around the wrecked vehicles. The smell of gasoline and charred metal made Nora gag. Bodies littered the ground, masked faces turned skyward. The night felt eerily quiet except for the crackle of burning debris and the distant hum of approaching vehicles. Though whether they were friend or foe, she couldn't tell. As they surveyed the ruined street, the flicker of movement made Wayne tighten his grip on the rifle. But his tension eased when he saw they were townspeople, not cartel members, emerging cautiously from the shadows. Some peeked out from half-boarded windows. Others stepped timidly from doorways. It reminded Nora of animals that had cowered in burrows during a storm, now sniffing the air to see if the danger had passed. A wiry, older man with silver-streaked hair ventured closest, trembling hands raised as if to show he wasn't armed. He looked from the fallen gunman to Wayne and Nora. His voice was shaky. Are they all gone?" Wayne hesitated before nodding. "Reyes is down. Don't know if some of them fled, but the fight looks over." The man's face crumpled with relief. Behind him, a small group clustered, a middle-aged woman clutching a teenage boy, a few dusty laborers with lines of worry etched deep into their brows. None wore expressions of hostility. Instead, they gazed at Wayne and Nora with something akin to awe. "Thank you," the older man managed, voice thick. "You did what none of us had the courage to do." Nora's cheeks burned. She didn't feel heroic. The adrenaline crash left her shaky and cold. "We just wanted to survive," she murmured. The woman stepped forward, her eyes wet with tears. "Reyes and his men have terrorized us for years. The police, if they ever came, would do nothing. Those men had paid off everyone." She paused, gaze flicking to Reyes's motionless form in the alley. "He claimed he owned this town, but now," her voice trailed, overshadowed by an unspoken question. "What now?" Wayne blew out a breath, surveying the carnage. "I'm sorry it came to this," he said quietly, "but they gave us no choice." A silence fell, broken only by the crackling remains of the SUV and the hushed murmurs of townsfolk stepping gingerly through the debris. A few of Reyes's surviving henchmen had either fled into the desert or lay wounded. Nora eyed the horizon, half expecting headlights of more reinforcements, but saw only darkness. Maybe their biggest advantage had been that Reyes didn't gather all his forces here in time. Just then, a guttural groan from near the battered pickup jerked Wayne's attention. He raised his rifle, but the older man waved a hand, stepping forward. "That's Mateo. He's just a driver for them," the man said, voice hesitant. "He's local, forced to cooperate." Wayne exchanged a glance with Nora. She nodded. They had no appetite for further killing if it wasn't necessary. Wayne lowered his weapon. "We'll call for medical help, but I don't know how soon an ambulance can reach this place." The older man grimaced, confirming the dire state of local infrastructure. "We'll help how we can." Nora's throat felt raw. She wanted nothing more than to hug Wayne and leave this blood-soaked street behind. But she couldn't deny the pang of empathy that rose as she watched townspeople gather around the wounded. This place had been under a cruel regime for far too long, and tonight's violence might be the painful birth of a new beginning. Wayne slung his rifle across his back, feeling the sting of minor injuries flare up now that the gunfight had ended. His clothes were torn in places, blood crusted along his forearm. Nora leaned into him, exhaustion etched into her face. The adrenaline that had kept them upright was fading fast, replaced by trembling fatigue. A distant engine rumble made them both tense again. But this time, the headlights belonged to a battered pickup truck, slowly rolling in from the north side of town. It stopped a few yards away from the wreckage, and a figure stepped out. An older woman in a plain white blouse, her dark hair pulled back in a tight braid. She lifted her hands in a gesture of peace, shouting, "We've come to help the wounded." A couple more people hopped out of the truck's bed, carrying a large medical kit. The older man who had spoken earlier hurried over to them, explaining the situation in hushed Spanish. Wayne caught scattered phrases. "Cartel finished," "town free," and "much blood." The truck's arrival seemed to break whatever tension remained. Townspeople who'd hidden behind doors and shutters began to emerge in greater numbers. A few carried lanterns or flashlights, illuminating the rubble-strewn street. The woman with the medical kit knelt beside the first injured man she found, barking instructions to bystanders to fetch blankets and water. Nora's gaze swept the area. Bodies of Reyes's men lay scattered, though some still clung to life. A pall of smoke hovered, the stench acrid in the desert air. She and Wayne might have turned the tide, but the cost in blood was evident. Feeling a swell of nausea, she clutched Wayne's arm for support. "We need to help if we can," she said softly, torn between her revulsion and sense of duty. Wayne nodded, though he looked equally drained. "Right, he murmured, though the idea of offering aid to men who tried to kill them felt surreal. Still, these were human lives, some likely pressed into service by fear or desperation. With a resigned sigh, Wayne approached the nearest wounded thug, one who was groaning in agony, a tourniquet half applied. An elderly townsman, hands unsteady, was trying to tie off the tourniquet. Wayne slid down to one knee, checking the tension. He'd learned a bit of first aid over the years. Truckers often did. "Tie it higher, above the wound," he instructed, voice tight. The man nodded, adjusting it. They worked in tense silence, ignoring the pain curses from the cartel fighter. Meanwhile, Nora found her way to a woman tending another injured man, this one shot through the shoulder. She grimaced at the sight, but she helped press gauze to the wound. The man whimpered, whether in pain or shock. She swallowed, remembering how easily he might have been the one to pull the trigger on her. A wave of dizziness struck her. Everything from the past several hours, the kidnapping, the terror, the firefight, crashed down on her psyche. For a moment, she thought she might faint. She felt Wayne's steady presence behind her as he came to check on her. "Nora," he murmured, concern etched into his face. She forced a smile that wobbled at the edges. "I'll be okay," she whispered, blinking back tears. "We're still alive." That simple truth grounded her, even amidst the chaos. The first tendrils of dawn light crept over the eastern horizon, illuminating the ruined street in a harsh glow that revealed the true cost of the night's violence. Smoke still wafted from the remains of a charred SUV, its metal skeleton half buried beneath debris. Dozens of spent bullet casings glinted in the rising sun, a grim testament to the firefight that had raged only hours before. Wayne Fletcher and his wife Nora stood side by side near the cracked pavement, feeling the weight of everything they had endured. Townspeople busied themselves around them, trying to salvage what they could. Some guided the injured into makeshift treatment areas. Others set about dousing the last pockets of flame with buckets of water. A wave of subdued relief had passed through the population, but the tension was far from gone. For every cautious smile, there were two anxious glances at the main road, as though they expected more trouble at any moment. Despite the calm after the storm, the mood was complicated by lingering shock. A few hours earlier, many of these people had felt utterly powerless, trapped beneath Reyes's thumb, paying regular extortion money or enduring intimidation. Now their infamous oppressor lay defeated, his influence shattered by an unlikely pair of travelers and some last-minute courage from townsfolk who dared to help with first aid. But victory carried a heavy price: bullet-riddled storefronts, vehicles reduced to scrap, and a handful of bodies that had yet to be respectfully covered or moved. Nora could not shake the numbness that crept into her limbs whenever she glanced at the fallen men, especially those she herself had shot. She knew logically that she had acted in self-defense, but it didn't lessen the queasy guilt twisting in her stomach. Standing amid the rubble, Wayne kept his gaze firmly on the battered turquoise rig, some 50 yards away near the old water trough. Its front axle was bent from the collision, and the cab's windshield displayed a spiderweb of cracks. It was a miracle it still ran at all. The last of Reyes's reinforcements had either died, fled, or been taken into custody by impromptu local patrols determined to prevent them from regrouping. A group of younger men in dusty clothes patrolled the outskirts of the town, rifles slung over their shoulders. One of them, a teenager who couldn't have been older than 16, gave Wayne a nod of respect. The uneasy hush between them spoke volumes. They were grateful but uncertain about what came next. Nora slipped her hand into Wayne's and squeezed, drawing his attention away from the battered rig. He could read the unspoken question in her eyes. Do we stay and help, or do we leave before more danger arrives? For years they had lived life on the open road, always passing through towns without sinking roots. Yet here was a place that might need them a little longer. Even if the local police arrived, whenever that might be, there was a massive cleanup to handle, medical supplies to distribute, and shattered hearts to mend. Wayne thought about how close he had come to losing Nora. A lump formed in his throat. He squeezed her hand back in wordless reassurance. "We'll figure this out," he murmured, voice rough. "Let's see if there's more we can do." A short distance away, the older man with silver-streaked hair, who had first thanked them after the battle, was in quiet conversation with a couple of townspeople. He glanced over at Wayne and Nora, then beckoned them closer. Wayne noticed the man was limping slightly, perhaps from a past injury or the exhaustion of a sleepless night. As Wayne and Nora approached, he offered a gentle smile. "I'm Ramiro," he said in a hushed voice, holding out his hand, "and I owe you both more than I can express." Wayne shook Ramiro's hand, feeling the callous skin that spoke of a life of hard work. Nora nodded respectfully, still grappling with her own fatigue. Ramiro gestured around at the charred and bullet-scarred facades. "This is our town, La Estrella, or what's left of it. We've been under the cartel's control for so long, most folks can't remember a time before Reyes demanded his cut. We're all at a loss for how to move forward." Nora exchanged a glance with Wayne. "What about the local authorities?" she asked. "Surely they'll come now that Reyes—" She hesitated, not wanting to speak too bluntly of his demise. Ramiro gave a sad shrug. "The police out here have mostly been bought off. We could try calling them, but many times that just leads to more trouble. They'll come if they think it's in their interest, or if they smell an opportunity to seize control. With Reyes gone, maybe some other group tries to fill the vacuum. Or maybe we get real help. We just don't know." A thin, sun-baked woman who introduced herself as Josefina stepped forward, her eyes rimmed with fatigue. "I can drive to the larger city 2 hours from here and speak to the hospital staff. They might send ambulances if they realize what happened, but the roads are still dangerous." Her voice trembled with uncertainty. Wayne mentally recalled the route he'd taken that night, the lonely highway stretching between La Estrella and civilization. "My rig isn't in great shape," he began, "but if you can load any wounded into your pickup or a couple of cars that still run, Nora and I can help you get as far as the next county line. Maybe we can coordinate with the authorities there to ensure safe passage back." Ramiro chewed his lip, taking in Wayne's offer. Slowly he nodded. "That could work. We do have a couple of vehicles that weren't destroyed. We can drive the most seriously hurt to the hospital. The rest of us can start clearing debris, searching for survivors, and tending to those who can't travel yet." Nora felt a rush of relief at the semblance of a plan. "We'll do whatever we can," she said. "But we also need to think about the possibility of more cartel members returning." Ramiro's face clouded. "Yes, that's the risk. If word spreads that Reyes is dead, some opportunist could try to claim this territory." He straightened, voice steadier now. "But maybe this is our chance. If we show the rest of the region that we fought back and won, thanks in large part to you, they might think twice before trying to conquer us again." Throughout the early morning hours, La Estrella stirred with a collective sense of urgency. Teams of citizens formed organically, each led by those with relevant skills. A few elders with rudimentary medical training, including the woman who had arrived in the pickup at the end of the firefight, set up a rudimentary triage center in the shell of an old cantina. Wooden tables served as gurneys, and they improvised IV stands from broom handles and twine. Meanwhile, a group of younger men cleared away the twisted metal of wrecked cars under Ramiro's direction, ensuring the streets would be navigable for any ambulances or rescue vehicles that might come later. Wayne pitched in where he could, hefting metal scraps into piles, wincing only occasionally when a jolt of pain reminded him that his shoulder and arms were bruised from the battle. Nora focused on helping the makeshift medical team, offering water and towels to the wounded. She saw the agony in some of their eyes, both physical pain and the realization that their way of life had irrevocably changed in one cataclysmic night. Some were Reyes's henchmen or forced collaborators who had survived their injuries and lay awaiting medical attention. Others were townsfolk caught in the crossfire, bullet grazes and shattered windows marking their homes and bodies. Nora's presence seemed to calm a few frightened onlookers. Seeing her unflinching resolve, they recognized she was not just a frightened hostage, but a person who had risked everything to stand up for them. Around mid-morning, Josefina and two other drivers began loading the most critical cases into vehicles that had been hastily patched up. Wayne helped secure a tarp over the back of an old pickup, making a rudimentary bed for a man with a severe leg wound. The man's face was pale, lips cracked, but he nodded in quiet gratitude. An older woman stroked his hair, whispering words of comfort. Josefina, eyes still red from sleeplessness, checked that each driver had enough water and a sense of the route. Once they set off, dust trailing their wheels, the tension in town eased slightly. At least now, the most urgent cases had a chance at professional medical care. Nora wiped sweat from her brow, scanning the crowds for any sign of Wayne. She spotted him near their crumpled rig, scanning the engine block with a frown. She threaded her way through the throng of people, stepping over twisted hubcaps and shards of glass. The rig was blackened around the hood, the steel battered from the collision. Wayne had the driver's side door propped open, rummaging behind the seat for a spare canteen of water. When he saw her approach, he gave a weary nod. "Figured I'd see if we can nurse the truck back to drivable condition," he said, patting the hood with a mixture of affection and regret. "I'm not hopeful, though. The front axle's warped, and the radiator's shot." Nora's chest tightened. She knew how much this rig meant to Wayne. To see it so mangled tugged at her heart, but the bigger concern was simply that they might be stranded. "Think we can get it running at all?" He shrugged, the motion drawing a wince of pain. "I can try some patchwork, but it may not make it far. We might have to hitch a ride or see if the folks here can spare a working vehicle once things calm down." Letting out a breath, he glanced around at the battered town. "It's weird, isn't it? We fought so hard to protect ourselves, but now it feels like we're tied to this place, at least until we know it's safe to leave." Nora nodded. "We owe them for helping us too. Let's see this through." By noon, the heat pressed down on La Estrella with relentless force, and the collective efforts of the townspeople had begun to yield some semblance of order. Makeshift barricades were cleared away so cars could pass through the main street more easily. The injured who hadn't been evacuated yet were stabilizing under the attentive eyes of the volunteer medics. Bodies of the fallen cartel men, save for Reyes, were respectfully covered with tarps and placed in an old warehouse for identification later. It was a somber process. Even if those men had come to terrorize the town, some might have been coerced or had families far away. No one wanted to be entirely callous, though relief mixed with sorrow as they recognized their oppressors would no longer plague them. Reyes's body remained where he had fallen in the alley, lightly shrouded by a dusty sheet. Ramiro mentioned that some of the townsfolk wanted to keep it there temporarily, a grim symbol that might dissuade any lingering elements of the cartel from regrouping. Others argued for a quick burial to avoid attracting disease or predatory animals. The debate highlighted the underlying fear. Could another wave of vengeance roll in if word spread incorrectly? If it seemed the town had acted disrespectfully? Ultimately, they decided to move his remains to the warehouse with the others. Wayne, overhearing, expressed a quiet agreement. "Leaving a body out in the open invites trouble," he said softly. "Better to handle it with care, even if he was your enemy." In the far corner of the town square, Nora sat on the tailgate of a battered pickup, sipping from a water bottle. Her entire body felt like a live wire of exhaustion. An elderly woman passed by, pressing a small corn tortilla filled with beans into Nora's free hand. "Eat," the woman insisted gently. "You need strength." Nora thanked her with an appreciative nod. Despite the swirl of activity around her, the simple act of biting into the warm tortilla eased her nerves, a small reminder of normalcy amidst chaos. She tried to savor the taste, letting it momentarily overshadow the metallic tang of gunpowder that still seemed to cling to her tongue. She watched as Wayne and a few local men hauled salvageable parts off the wrecked SUV that had once belonged to the cartel. If anything, the bits of metal and the engine components might be sold or repurposed. Wayne's voice carried over the clanking of tools, instructing them on how to remove a fuel pump or strip out intact wiring. It struck Nora that in another time and place, Wayne might have been a teacher, passing on mechanical knowledge with the same calm assurance he used to navigate treacherous mountain passes. The men listened intently, grateful for his expertise. A fleeting swell of pride rose in Nora's chest. Even under the worst of circumstances, Wayne found a way to help. Nearby, a group of curious onlookers huddled at the mouth of the alley where the final showdown had occurred. They pointed to the bullet holes peppering the walls, some trailing from knee-height up to the roofline. She saw parents clasping children's shoulders, as if to say, "Look at what we lived through. Remember this night." Nora's stomach twisted. The memory of Reyes's gun pointed at her flashed before her eyes, and she pushed the tortilla away, appetite gone. Focus on the good, she told herself. They had survived. They had broken a cruel cycle of oppression here. Maybe their actions would inspire other towns to stand up for themselves. But for now, all she could do was breathe and try to gather the energy to help rebuild a town that, for one night, had become a war zone. Around mid-afternoon, Josefina returned with a small convoy. 2 pickup trucks loaded with donated medical supplies, blankets, and a single paramedic, who wore a faded uniform and a weary determination. This minor reinforcement was a lifesaver in more ways than one. Within minutes of arriving, the paramedic assessed the wounded in the makeshift clinic, quietly announcing that while some of the injuries were severe, most victims should recover if they received proper rest and care. The sight of these new faces lifted the townspeople's spirits, proof that they weren't as isolated or hopeless as they once feared. Josefina pulled Wayne and Nora aside, giving them each a tight hug. "I told the city hospital about the situation," she explained. "They're swamped and can't spare more than 1 paramedic right now, but at least they gave us supplies. I also told them about the men who were holding the town hostage. They—" She paused, her brow furrowing. "They didn't sound surprised. They said cartels have been on the rise in this region for years." Wayne frowned. "Did they mention the police or federal authorities?" Josefina shook her head. "They said they'd pass the information along, but no one is sure if the local police are compromised. We might see federal officers if the story catches enough attention, but for now we're on our own." Nora exchanged a worried look with Wayne. "That means we need to be prepared in case more cartel members come sniffing around." She glanced at the people bustling through the dusty street, tending to tasks with an urgency that felt almost frantic. "This town can't fight an entire army, but maybe the show of resistance here will make some criminals think twice. A nearby voice chimed in. We've started collecting the weapons left behind. We'll store them in a safe place. If more trouble comes, we'll be better prepared. It was Ramiro who approached with a battered AK-47 slung across his shoulder, a weapon likely stripped from a fallen gunman. His posture was uneasy, as though carrying such a lethal tool weighed on his conscience. I've never liked guns, he muttered, but we have to protect what's ours. Nora couldn't blame him. She remembered her own reluctance, the shock of firing at another human being. Yet in situations like this, idealism often took a back seat to survival. That's smart, she agreed, as long as you keep them locked up. The last thing you need is more bloodshed by accident. Ramiro nodded. We'll set some clear rules. Everyone who wants to protect the town will train properly. No more living in fear. His voice trembled slightly, but there was a resolve behind his words that Nora recognized. The same spark that had propelled her and Wayne to fight back. The sun continued its slow arc overhead, casting elongated shadows through La Estrella's streets. Despite the tragedy of the night before, a surprising sense of solidarity blossomed. Families who barely knew each other now worked side by side, clearing rubble and boarding up shattered windows. Younger children, initially dazed by the violence, began to play quietly with pebbles and sticks in the dusty corners, as though trying to reclaim a scrap of childhood innocence. Wayne and Nora found themselves repeatedly thanked, offered what little food or water the townspeople could spare. They accepted graciously, but insisted they were simply doing what anyone would do in their shoes. A part of Nora, though, understood that was never how it worked in reality. Most people, herself included, spent their lives hoping never to face lethal threats. Standing up to armed criminals was anything but ordinary. As evening approached, Wayne and Nora retreated to a quiet spot near the town's modest chapel, a building with peeling white paint and a small bell tower that cast a long shadow across the dirt road. They sat on a low stone wall lining the chapel's courtyard, the cool surface a relief against the desert's persistent heat. Both of them were physically spent, limbs heavy with fatigue, but neither felt ready to sleep. Sleep meant letting their guard down, and they were not yet convinced La Estrella was truly safe. Nora sighed, resting her head on Wayne's shoulder. It's surreal, she said softly. Less than 24 hours ago, I was driving along that lonely highway, thinking I'd get a quick bite to eat and hole up in a cheap motel. Now, she closed her eyes, picturing the swirl of gunfire. So much has changed. Wayne ran a calloused hand through her hair. We've seen a lot on the road, but I never expected we'd end up in a full-scale battle. His voice was thick with residual anger. They took you, threatened you. I don't think I've ever been that scared. She turned to meet his gaze. Me neither, but you found me. You always do. A moment of shared silence passed between them. Wayne considered the future. What if more cartel members showed up? Or if word spread that a lone trucker and his wife had humiliated a dangerous gang? They might become targets again. His mind leapt anxiously from one scenario to another, each more dire than the last. Yet beneath all that fear lay an undercurrent of pride. Pride that they had faced down evil together. The chapel doors opened, revealing a tall, lean man wearing dusty work clothes. He paused, noticing Wayne and Nora on the wall. You two. His voice was gentle. Would you like to come inside and light a candle? It's not exactly a Sunday service, but some of us are praying for those who are lost. Nora hesitated, glancing at Wayne. They weren't particularly religious, but the idea of a quiet, reflective moment felt strangely appealing. Wayne gave a small nod. Sure, he said, standing and offering a hand to help Nora up. We could use a moment of peace. Inside, the chapel's walls were lit by a row of flickering candles on a simple wooden altar. A handful of townspeople knelt in the pews, heads bowed. Some whispered prayers, while others simply sat in contemplative silence. The tall man guided them to a little table at the side, where unused candles waited. Nora picked one up, turning it over in her hands before lighting the wick. She thought about the people who died last night. Some of them monstrous criminals, yes, but also a few innocent bystanders caught in the crossfire. She set the candle down, the tiny flame dancing. Wayne did the same, reflecting privately on how close he'd come to losing Nora. For him, the flame symbolized gratitude that she was still alive and free. The hush of the chapel allowed them both to absorb their thoughts without interruption. The subtle echo of footsteps on the wooden floor mingled with the soft murmurs of prayer, weaving a soothing tapestry around Wayne and Nora's tattered nerves. When they left the chapel, darkness was settling over La Estrella once more, but this night felt distinctly different from the last. Where there had been raw terror and the deafening roar of gunfire, now there was the subdued activity of a wounded but determined town. Lanterns and flashlights glowed in windows and along alleys, highlighting the ongoing cleanup. People were still on edge, but at least they weren't cowering. Instead, they focused on small tasks, barricading a broken door, scrubbing away soot, or piling debris so trucks could haul it out in the morning. Nora and Wayne made their way to a corner of the main street where an older woman named Sylvia offered them two threadbare blankets and gestured to a partially intact bed inside a shuttered general store. "We don't have much, but you can rest here if you like," Sylvia said. Her voice shook with weariness, but her kindness was evident. "You must be exhausted." A wave of appreciation and awkwardness washed over Nora. She realized they had nowhere else to sleep, certainly not in their crippled rig. "Thank you," she said softly. "We don't mean to impose." Sylvia shook her head. "Impose after what you've done for this town? You deserve a proper bed more than anyone." She managed a small, tired smile before shuffling back to her own makeshift sleeping area, where a half-dozen townspeople were huddled on blankets laid over the store's dusty floor. The bed was in a cramped back room once used for storing flour and sugar, judging by the torn sacks strewn about. A single lantern cast flickering shadows on the brick walls. Nora tested the mattress, wincing at the loud squeak. Still, it felt like luxury compared to the possibility of sleeping in the rig's narrow cab. Wayne set the rifle he'd carried to the side, though he made sure it was within arm's reach. Then he stretched his aching limbs with a groan, easing onto the bed next to her. Fatigue hit them both like a tidal wave. Nora's eyelids felt like lead, her muscles aching from tension held for too long. She leaned her head against Wayne's shoulder. Outside, she could still hear occasional voices, footsteps on gravel, and the clang of metal against metal. The thought that someone else might have to stand guard kept her from fully relaxing. Yet there was no denying her body needed rest. Wayne gently wrapped an arm around her. "Go to sleep," he murmured. "I'll keep watch for a while." She shook her head, forcing her eyes to stay open. "No, we both need sleep," she whispered back. "We'll trust the town's watchers tonight." It was a leap of faith, but seeing how La Estrella's people had rallied, Nora sensed they wouldn't be left undefended. Ramiro and his impromptu patrols had been determined to protect their victory from any immediate retaliation. Wayne exhaled, the tension in his posture slowly dissolving. "All right," he conceded, shifting to pull the blanket over them. Even the faintest comfort felt like an immense blessing after the terror they had endured. They lay there in silence for a few moments, the store's quiet interior reminding Nora of simpler nights in roadside motels, when the biggest concern was finding the best route for the next day's deliveries. Just before sleep overtook her, Nora whispered, "I love you, Wayne." He leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. "I love you too, Nora." They awoke at dawn to the distant crowing of a rooster, a sound Nora never expected to find comforting. But after the chaos of gunfire, any natural noise felt like a soothing balm. Sunlight filtered through the missing boards in a half-broken window, revealing dust motes dancing in the air. Wayne stirred first, carefully rolling off the bed to keep from jostling Nora's bruises. She blinked awake and sat up, her back stiff from unfamiliar bedding. A few others were already up in the main part of the store, sorting through scattered inventory and planning to reopen. One of them, a lanky teenager with an earnest smile, offered Wayne a chipped mug of black coffee. Wayne accepted it gratefully, the warmth in his hands helping to ease some residual aches. Nora joined him, taking a sip and grimacing at the bitter strength. But caffeine was caffeine. They stepped outside into the cool morning air, finding La Estrella transformed yet again. Although bullet holes still pockmarked buildings and shards of glass lay in gutters, the people were carrying on, sweeping, repairing, cooking. A sense of determination pulsed through the dusty streets. Ramiro approached them, eyes weary, but resolute. "We're organizing a convoy later today," he informed them. Some folks plan to go into the nearby towns to gather more supplies and, hopefully, find a government official willing to come here without being bought by the cartel. The fact that Reyes is gone might encourage honest policemen to step forward. Nora nodded. Count us in if you need help. She exchanged a glance with Wayne, who gave a brief nod in agreement. But at some point, we do need to figure out how to fix our truck or arrange a safe ride out of here. Ramiro's face grew serious. I understand, believe me. We don't want to keep you here against your will. You two have done enough, more than enough. His voice held genuine gratitude. But until the roads are secure, I worry about letting you travel alone. Wayne stepped toward the battered remains of his rig. She's not going anywhere without serious repairs, he said. I can do some patchwork, maybe get her mobile enough for the next 100 miles. But I'll need parts, everything from a new radiator to at least one front tire. Ramiro offered a thin smile. We might be able to scavenge parts from the cartel's wrecked vehicles. Not exactly top of the line, but maybe enough to limp you to a real mechanic. With that plan in mind, Wayne and several town volunteers set about rummaging through the remains of the black SUV and a couple of battered pickups that once served Reyes' crew. The process took hours, unbolting components, draining fluids, trying to see if any hoses or belts matched the rig's needs. All the while, Wayne kept one eye on the horizon, half expecting to see a plume of dust that signaled incoming trouble. Nora, meanwhile, joined a few residents in cooking a communal meal. She helped slice vegetables and stir a large metal pot balanced over an open flame. The aroma of simmering beans and roasted peppers mingled with the ever-present dust, creating a makeshift feast for the hungry workers. As she stirred, she listened to the hushed conversations around her. Stories of how La Estrella used to be a cheerful, if humble, desert stopover before the cartel arrived. An older woman spoke of a time when festivals lit the street with music, dancing, and bright paper decorations. We want that back, she said simply. We want our life back. Shortly after midday, the supply convoy was ready to depart. 3 vehicles had been loaded with fuel, water, produce, and basic necessities that other small towns might barter or exchange for medical goods. Ramiro would lead the convoy, accompanied by 2 able-bodied volunteers acting as guards. They carried rifles retrieved from the cartel's stash, a precaution that felt both necessary and nerve-wracking. Wayne and Nora spent the morning helping load boxes, verifying tire pressure on the vehicles, and ensuring that all who were going had enough water and food for the journey. Standing beside the convoy's lead pickup, Wayne turned to Ramiro. I can't leave with you. My rig's not ready, and he paused, eyeing the battered vehicle. Honestly, I don't feel right abandoning this town just yet. If there's any chance more of Rhea's men might return, I'd like to be here to help. Ramiro's eyes softened. Your bravery is appreciated, but we won't hold you to that. You've already put your lives on the line. Nora shook her head. Yes, you hadn't. We're staying. We'll help fortify things, or do whatever else is needed until you come back. You'll probably have more luck negotiating with officials if you can say the people who stopped the cartel are here, willing to talk. True, Ramiro said thoughtfully, rubbing at the stubble on his chin. He extended his hand again, and Wayne shook it firmly. Thank you for everything. If all goes well, we'll return in a day or 2 with help, and hopefully a mechanic or at least some parts that fit your rig. With that, Ramiro and his small team climbed into their trucks. Engines rumbled, kicking up clouds of dust as they rolled away from La Estrella. Some of the townspeople waved, while others offered hurried prayers for safe passage. Nora watched until the vehicles vanished around a bend in the road, her heart tight with worry. If the convoy ran into trouble, they'd have to fight their way out with limited manpower. But there was no point in agonizing over it. La Estrella still needed care. The next few hours saw Wayne crawling under the rig's chassis with a local farmhand named Carlitos, checking for cracks in the suspension. Occasionally, Nora heard Wayne cursing softly, followed by the clang of tools. Meanwhile, Nora helped at the improvised clinic. A young mother, trembling with stress, asked Nora to watch her baby for a moment while she ran to fetch clean rags. Nora found herself cradling the infant, who fussed at first but settled when Nora hummed an old lullaby she learned from her grandmother. The experience felt strangely grounding. In this harsh desert, life persisted, innocent and full of possibility. By late afternoon, a stillness settled over town, broken only by the clang of hammers and the murmur of subdued chatter. In the distance, vultures circled, drawn by the scent of dried blood. A group of locals had begun the grim task of transporting the cartel bodies to a mass gravesite beyond the town's edge, having no facilities to preserve them properly. It was a scene that left Nora fighting off waves of nausea and sorrow. "We didn't choose this," she reminded herself. "They brought the fight to us." As dusk approached for the second time since the battle, Wayne finally emerged from beneath the rig, streaked with oil and dust. "We've made a bit of progress," he said, forcing a half-smile. "Enough that maybe, just maybe, we can limp it out of here once we get a radiator and a couple more parts. But it's not going to be pretty." Night settled over La Estrella with a surprising calm. The air was cooler now, a gentle breeze rustling through the battered storefronts. Lanterns glowed like small beacons, spread out at intervals so that the main street wasn't plunged into total darkness. Families gathered outside their homes, sharing meager dinners under the stars. Despite the day's hard work, a weariness lingered in the air, an invisible weight of uncertainty about what tomorrow might bring. Wayne and Nora stood in front of the general store that had become their temporary shelter. From this vantage point, they could see the entire length of the road, including the old chapel at one end and the partially collapsed diner at the other. People drifted about, some nodding and greeting, others lost in their own thoughts. Wayne leaned against a wooden post, arms crossed, scanning the desert horizon. In the distance, the shape of mountains stood out against the star-spotted sky. "It's almost peaceful," Nora remarked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hard to believe so much blood was shed here just one night ago." Wayne nodded, letting the quiet wrap around them. "Makes you appreciate every moment of peace we get." Then his eyes flicked to the battered rig, half hidden in the shadows. "When I think about how close we came to losing each other." Nora placed a hand on his arm. "Let's not dwell on that. We survived. We helped free this town in a way. That has to count for something." They fell into a thoughtful silence, each processing the whirlwind of events: kidnapping, rescue, brutal firefight, and now an uneasy aftermath. Nora found herself remembering the countless highways they'd traveled together, the little roadside motels, the greasy diner breakfasts at dawn. She missed that simpler routine, but she also recognized she'd never be the same after this. Neither of them would. They had seen a side of life that couldn't be forgotten or easily set aside. A clamor of footsteps approached. Carlitos and two other young men appeared, rifles slung over their shoulders. Carlitos inclined his head in greeting. "We're starting a night watch rotation. Thought you might want to join, Mr. Fletcher, but we understand if you're too tired." Wayne pushed off the post, straightening. "I'm in. Just point me where you need me." Nora caught his hand. "I'll be okay here," she assured him. "Go help them keep watch." The truth was, she didn't want Wayne to stray far from her, but she knew the town's security mattered. She also sensed that Wayne needed to be active, to do something tangible that assured him Nora was safe for the night. "Check in on me if you get a break," she added softly. He nodded, leaning in to brush a kiss across her forehead. Then he followed Carlitos and the others down the main street, their silhouettes merging with the darkness. Nora took a seat on the general store's porch, hugging her knees. The sky above was a vast tapestry of stars, more than she'd ever seen in any city. Yet each shimmer reminded her how small they all were, how fleeting each day could be in the face of danger. In the distance, a coyote howled, its cry echoing across the desert. Nora closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound wash over her. She pictured the open road, the wind against the rig's windows, and the quiet hum of life with Wayne before fate brought them to the small town on the brink of catastrophe. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, perhaps the return of the supply convoy, or word from some official authority. But for tonight, La Estrella rested as best it could, and so would Nora, holding on to hope that this small reprieve of calm might last. Looking back on everything Wayne and Nora endured, it's impossible not to feel inspired by their strength and the unity that blossomed within La Estrella. Through shared courage and a willingness to fight for what's right, the town transformed its darkest hours into a beacon of hope for anyone facing oppression. Yes, the scars are real, but so is the renewed sense of purpose uniting these people in their quest for a better life. What do you think? Could you see yourself standing up against such overwhelming odds? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Let's keep the conversation going. And if you've enjoyed this story of resilience and teamwork, remember to subscribe for more tales that remind us how courage and compassion can change the world.